Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu einem neuen Video hier auf dem Kanal von Rethink Peer-to-Peer-Kredite. Mein Name ist Danny Neithardt und heute ist es endlich soweit. Das allererste Interview der Baltikum-Reise 2019 kommt online. Es ist kein geringeres Interview als mit Mintos Gründer und CEO Martins Sulte himself. Und bevor ich ins Interview gleich rüberschneide, nur ein, zwei kurze Anmerkungen vorweg. Das Gespräch ging sehr lang, sehr ausführlich. Wir haben sehr interessante Themen angeschnitten. Unter anderem ging es um die FCA, die Expansionspläne von Mintos in Deutschland, aber natürlich auch einfach mal ein bisschen so einen Einblick zu gewinnen zu Martins selber, seinem persönlichen Werdegang und auch so ein bisschen die Entstehungsgeschichte von Mintos ein bisschen ausführlicher beleuchtet. Wer sich nur für einzelne Themen interessiert von diesem Interview, der schaut bitte unten in die Videobeschreibung. Dort findest du ein paar Timestamps und kannst dir gleich raussuchen, welche Fragen und welche Inhalte dich am meisten interessieren, wenn du dir nicht das komplette Gespräch ansehen möchtest. Als zweites, ja, wer den Vlog gesehen hat, der wird mitbekommen haben, es gab ein paar Aufnahmeschwierigkeiten. Mein Equipment lässt noch etwas zu wünschen übrig. Genauso wie meine Video- und YouTube-Erfahrung. Insofern gibt es zwei, drei etwas ungewöhnliche Schnitte im Verlauf des Interviews. Dort bitte nicht wundern, meine Kamera ist einfach ausgegangen unterwegs während des Interviews. Deswegen musste da immer wieder neu angesetzt werden. Deswegen war es auch für Martins, glaube ich, nicht so ganz einfach, wobei er es sehr sportlich gesehen und auch genommen hat. Hier also bitte nicht wundern. Und letzter Hinweis auch nochmal für diejenigen, die noch keine Investoren bei Mintos sind. Ich habe unten in der Videobeschreibung einen Anmeldelink reingepackt und nach Absprache mit Mintos haben wir ein kleines Gewinnspiel vereinbart. Und zwar wird es für alle Neuanmeldungen, für alle neuen Registrierungen im Zeitraum vom 12. bis zum 26. April ein kleines Gewinnspiel geben. Mintos verlost jeweils 10 Hoodies bzw. 10 Mintos gebrandete Trinkflaschen, die ihr gewinnen könnt. Wie gesagt, 10 Stück jeweils unter allen Neuanmeldungen. Dafür einfach unten den Link in der Anmeldung, den Link in der Videobeschreibung nutzen für die Anmeldung. So rum. Genau, das war's schon. Jetzt wünsche ich viel Spaß mit dem Interview. Wie immer, Däumchen werden Träumchen, kommentieren, lasst uns gerne in den Austausch kommen, wie ihr das Interview fandet. Und ja, abonnieren, ihr wisst ja, wie es läuft. Und jetzt viel Spaß mit dem Interview.
Yeah, hello and welcome. Live from the Mintos Marketplace office. I'm here with CEO and founder Martins Sulte. Is that pronounced correctly?
Sort of, yeah. In Latvian it would be a bit different, but
how do you?
In Latvian you add a bit like umlaut. Martins Sulte. So it's actually very German.
That sounds very German.
Schulte is very German.
Schulte, yeah.
It's very German.
I always pronounce it Sulte.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was more the Latvian.
In Latvian you put like S and then you put like another thing on top of it. So I go like international. Martins Sulte is fine.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for having me here today in the office. I had a very nice welcoming reception from a few people. And yeah, good to be here, and hopefully you can answer some questions that I have, also a few that have been submitted by the community that were interested in your plans with Mintos in the future, especially.
Sure, happy to.
And probably to start off, I think Mintos is very well received among German investors. Just prior to that conversation, I used to talk with Igor, which is your marketing head, and he said more than 50% of the people, of the investors, are coming from Germany. So probably the German audience will very much know Mintos already, most probably also you. Maybe if there's some new viewers to this video, maybe a quick introduction of yourself. Obviously you're the CEO of Mintos, but maybe from yourself a few words, who you are, and maybe a few personal notes before you started Mintos.
Sure, happy to. Where do I start? That's a good question. Basically, my previous career, or before Mintos, so after my undergrad, I used to study at Stockholm School of Economics, which is here in Riga, one of the business schools, actually highly rated business school here. Thereafter, I actually was for 2 years, no, not for two, actually for a year and a bit, I was in Ernst & Young, in one of the big four audit companies here. Working mostly on financial service companies with the banks and so forth, so auditing them. But very soon after, I realized that's not going to be my thing. And then I switched to investment banking. I joined SEB. SEB is one of the leading Nordic banks. And obviously, a lot of Scandinavian banks are here. And I joined SEB, and I was in investment banking and specifically in M&A for a good 6 years, helping basically mostly selling the companies, selling the owners, helping to sell their companies.
Like mergers or?
Mostly acquisitions, less of mergers, but basically mergers and acquisitions. Okay. Some IPOs, but mostly just like pure M&A. And then after a good 6 years there, I was actually... I knew I'm going to go for MBA one day anyway, and then after like 6 years I decided to do an MBA. Then I went for my master's in business administration for MBA. I picked INSEAD, which is one of international schools with the campuses in France and in Singapore, studied there. And then usually after INSEAD, actually it's fairly international, highly ranked school, though you would actually stay abroad. But then I actually knew that I'm going to come back. My initial plan was actually to come back after like 3 to 5 years of after graduation, still work somewhere in London or somewhere, most likely in Europe, and then come back and do entrepreneurship. But actually I decided why wait for 5 years and came back straight after INSEAD to Latvia.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my previous kind of experience before Mintos.
Yeah, I was kind of, I can say I was double checking obviously on your Vita as well, a bit on LinkedIn, and I looked at your profile. And, I also came across that position, like that 6 years that you talked about as working as an investment banker. And, how would you say, to which extent has this job, working in the financial industry, kind of affected you later working at Mintos or setting up Mintos? You feel like how and to which extent would you, because when I look back at my personal Vita, and there's always like some let's say crucial parts that decide your further development. And would you say being work in investment banking was something that formed you in the way you are a CEO now of a, let's say, fintech company?
I believe that every experience obviously affects your further decisions along the life. Would I say that there was like a direct impact? Most likely not necessarily, because obviously investment banking is still kind of consulting business. You're going in, yes, you see a lot of companies, you meet a lot of like C-level executives, like shareholders, like people who are actually have built the company for 10 years, 15 years, and then they want to sell it, and those are big decisions which they make. So what you get used to kind of a scale, and that's helpful, and you get used to having ambitions. And obviously the companies which we worked with at the investment banking, they were still local or regional, so their ambition was kind of broader than just Latvia or the Baltics, but still it was limited. I think the most actually impact came from INSEAD, from my MBA studies. It's one of the basically top 5 or top 3 business schools in the world. You see a lot of nationalities. In my class I had like 80 nationalities from 80 different from all around the world, and basically that gave me a lot of actually in terms of personal growth and so forth, and also in kind of when looking about entrepreneurship. So from day one when we started Mintos, I knew it's global ambition. Like definitely, there was no question about like building the biggest in Latvia, in the Baltics or something. And today, to be honest, actually Latvia is only where we sit in. Like 95% of the business is outside of Latvia. So it's some of the misconception which we see among investors when they look at Mintos, they consider yes, that's kind of Latvian. Well, yeah, we sit here, but all the business we do outside, like all the loan originators, loan supply comes from 29 different countries. Anything from Latin America to Africa to Southeast Asia and Europe, obviously, and likewise the investors side. So that's, I think, every experience counts, and definitely my investment banking experience also obviously helped, and so as well, like doing MBA and being just exposed to so many kind of nationalities and in general, like having this global view, and that's also helpful actually now in Mintos when we build out relationships, say, with the loan originators. I always gonna have somebody in the region who knows somebody. There's some network in all the actually countries, and that's actually been super helpful.
Probably maybe with part of the intention from that question was also if you probably during that time understood being an employee is not always what probably appeals you the most, so you probably want to you realize maybe you want to shape your own vision of in the finance sector or something you want to do on your own.
I think this entrepreneurial bug has been with me since very early age, because my parents were kind of a typical post-Soviet Union type of entrepreneurs doing all sorts of stuff like in entrepreneurship and so forth, and I think I had this from very early age. So intentionally, most likely after my undergrad, I went into actually Ernst & Young, just getting more broader experience and just more like solid basics than in investment banking, which was more exciting and just getting even more broader view. And then the next kind of step was obviously going in entrepreneurship. So that's been, I think, with me like since very early age, definitely.
Do you have, let's say, also examples for that entrepreneurial spirit? Because I can maybe share with when I used to be with Bondora, their CEO Perte Tomberg, he told me that back then when he was young, from a few experience, one for instance was when he went to Germany to work for a contract exclusively to promote clothes from Rockaware. And he had no clue about it at all, but just read a few books and bought a suit and went there. And so I really came across that entrepreneurial spirit and, like writing articles about sport and letting others do it, this outsourcing element. Did you have like similar experiences when you were younger?
So in very early age, definitely. Like even as a kid, like I was just helping my parents, and we used to have like grocery stores. So I was just helping them. They gave me some budget. I could go to the actually the warehouse, buy stuff, and then kind of make my own small business together with them. So it's been always kind of on the side, but it's never been something which I do like full time. So I've been involved here and there, but nothing like full time. So I would say also after undergrad, it wasn't really like all the startup scene here in the region, or in general, I would say across the globe, like all the startup scene when I graduated for undergrad, which is like 2006, it wasn't there. So you would not most likely think about like technology startups at that time that much. So on the side, yes, well, the opportunities come and so forth, but nothing like specifically full time.
Okay.
And I used to actually, one could be another kind of example of entrepreneurship, but in a very different perspective. Is actually I used to be also a semi-professional poker player.
Oh,
and that's also kind of actually running your own business, because when you become actually start earning money with that, so there's a lot about like your bankroll management, how much you like play, which kind of stakes, what not, and where you participate, and that's also actually been helpful in thinking about making decisions. And that's also been also in general about your kind of decision-making process that in poker, actually what you do is limited amount of information, you make the best decision, and then you don't really look at your results. You're not results-oriented, so you just make best decision on the information you have, and that's also have been helpful in general, kind of, when I think about making decisions.
Yeah, that's interesting. What do you mean by semi-professional?
I was still working full-time, so.
But on the side
I was,
you were.
Yeah, on the side I was playing, but that was when I was 20 something.
Okay.
5 or so.
Okay, interesting. You talked about, you know, when you did your MBA. Somewhere I read that during that time, in order to finance your studies, you have been using a P2P lending service yourself as a borrower with Prodigy Finance. Is that correct? And can you tell us the story?
Sure. So the Prodigy Finance is basically a P2P platform in a kind of classical sense. And the difference though would be that the investors are actually graduates of INSEAD, of the MBA school, of the business school I went to. So they are graduates which actually come together and finance the loan of the borrowers, of the prospective students. Obviously, the MBA is fairly costly. So many students actually, including myself, so I didn't have that much of savings, or my family couldn't help me that much. So I actually financed all the studies myself. So I had to take a loan. I was actually approaching the banks here and asking them, I mean, I even have the property. I said, I'm going to give you a property
I read that
and just
as well.
give me like a loan which is secured by the property. Give me even like 50% of the value of the property. They said, well, we don't have such a product. And I was actually on the brink when I was thinking, well, I would not make actually to MBA, which I really wanted to do. And I think it would be very helpful to myself, but I just didn't have funding for that. And then Prodigy, which is closely linked with INSEAD and run by one of INSEAD alumni, actually is a co-founder of Prodigy, and approached them and took a loan from them. And were actually not mine, but the recent graduates of INSEAD were supporting or funding the loan.
Yeah. I think that's probably more of an incident that was shaping you in the future, you know, setting up Mintos, you know, like property-backed loan, and then you don't even, you know, the bank says no. That's crazy. One thing that came across me, you know, like, I don't know, maybe that's very, very individual, subjective observation, but I always have the feeling when I look at Mintos, and especially, let's say, in your position or about your position, that you appear mostly, I don't know if it's introvert or, I don't know, I always have the feeling like you don't really want to be in the center of attention, and at least it's a feeling that I came across. Is it something like that's, you know, fair to say, or do you, because I feel like you tend to try to avoid to be too much in the center and saying Mintos and everywhere and holding the flag. You're very passive leader, probably. I don't know.
I think, I mean, on the personal level, I would think I would not go out and kind of boast about something which we gonna do in the future and build kind of bright future and so forth. I much rather like talking about the results, and I think in general results talk more about what you've done than just going out and telling like building castles and whatnot and the story. So that's perhaps definitely kind of my personal trait, and that's I wouldn't say that we are kind of avoiding the spotlight, but we're not also going out and just everywhere trying to put our name and saying that we are the best. I think what we do is basically the results themselves show much better what we've done, and that's most likely how we see it.
Okay. It was just a personal observation, so I was curious how you see it.
But it's also actually related to the fact that so far we have done very little on marketing side. So Igor, who's our chief marketing officer, he actually joined 6 months ago. On communications as well, it's all been very much like product driven. So what we've done, we've worked heavily on product, building a nice user experience, having a lot of opportunities to invest in, building the tools for that, and we've seen always that investors are actually coming through word of mouth, and of course through kind of referrals, through affiliates and so forth, but which still is word of mouth, so we don't go out and do marketing. And that's also, I think, could build to your kind of observation that we might not seem that we have the kind of the most kind of publicity seeking company.
Okay, you let results talk then.
Today perhaps when we need when we have a lot of loan supply coming in, and we are now working more on actually bringing in more investors. So obviously we invest more in marketing and communication. So you might see us more definitely.
Talking about another Martins in your company that is a bit more the silent part, Martins Valters. He's currently the COO as well as the CFO. He's also one of the founder of Mintos with you. How did you both guys, how did you get to know each other?
Yeah, so actually Martins is very actually common name here in Latvia. So we have our CTO is also Martins. So I think in Latvia there are about 12,000 Martins, and in Latvia in total you have like 2 million people, of which like 1.2 or 1.4 million are Latvians, and half would be male. And then out of those 600-700 males, you're gonna have like 12,000 Martins or so. So it's a fairly popular name here. And the Martins Valters he's actually my first direct manager. So when I joined Ernst & Young in audit, he was my first direct manager. So I joined as first year consultant, and he was kind of senior consultant. So we were working together on auditing some of the financial service companies in the banks. He stayed with Ernst & Young for a good 11 years, actually, 10 years. So he never changed a job after undergrad. And then when we started Mintos, and I was thinking about the co-founder, then Martins was actually somebody which was very at the top, and both us kind of working together, knowing each other, trusting each other, and also kind of perhaps different strengths. So he's more the guy who's gonna maybe say, okay, let's kind of take it slower, let's kind of think if we have covered all the risks and so forth, whereas I will be more kind of pushing forward, okay, we have to move forward and so forth, and then that gives a good synergy.
Okay, but clearly what I hear now is the main idea about Mintos came from you. So at one day probably, or one time it blossomed your mind or in your head, okay, I have this vision about the company, was then later called Mintos. So it was not something that, or did you say like we need, how was the, let's say, establishing process of Mintos? So when was probably the first time it actively came to your mind, okay, I need to, found a company that works in that P2P lending area?
Sure. So actually initially after finishing my MBA, my initial plan was to build venture capital fund. Investing here across the Baltics. Did the initial research for like 3 to 4 months and realized there's not enough opportunities in startup scene to invest. There were a few, but not enough to build like proper venture capital fund. And if there's not enough opportunities, you have to create them yourself. And that was my thought process. And even when starting MBA, I had Evernote note or somewhere I had the notes where I just were putting ideas what I could do sometime in the future, and I was actually going very diligently about this process, what I could do, and I was thinking more about actually where I could add value. And well, I have experience in finance. Most of my I did undergrad, then afterwards I did the CFA, which is one of the certification for finance. I did the CFA kind of certification. I did MBA. So most of my experience is in finance and technology. Actually, I used to be, when I was a kid, I was like full on computer. So I knew very well I could disassemble the computer, and the initial computers I knew fairly well. and in general, I was just fascinated by technology, what you can do with the help of technology. And then putting this together, finance and technology seemed that actually the way to go. And then, when I realized that this venture capital fund, of course, with my investment banking experience, next kind of not logical, but one kind of way to go is to go in venture capital or private equity. Look there in the venture capital, saw that there are not enough opportunities, and then we're just looking, okay, what next? What else? What we could do? And then I was just actually reading some of the. I was reading actually TechCrunch, and on TechCrunch I just saw there's a kind of a P2P at that time, which is 2014, still early days. I just saw a company in the UK which was doing something similar to what was initial actually idea of Mintos. Initially, at Mintos we were actually, if you will, a classical P2P lender. So we were actually sourcing the borrowers ourselves, and that was mortgage-backed loans.
Yeah.
So basically, we were sourcing the borrowers, underwriting them, doing credit scores, putting all the paperwork in place, and then funding those loans through the platform. So that was the initial idea of Mintos.
Okay.
And then we pivoted very soon after. Like we launched in 2015 January, and we pivoted something like in April or May 2015. We realized that there's much bigger need in the market in building a marketplace as ours today. And then we just pivoted, and I would say that from something like September 2015, we've been doing what we do now.
Okay.
So there's been as many ideas, there's evolution how you get to them. So it wasn't that from day one we knew there's going to be us as a marketplace with many kind of loan originators and investor base on the other side.
Yeah. Okay. It kind of gets already to a question that I had later on, but I think it's good to bring it up now, because from my perspective, when you start a P2P lending company, looking at the different business models, it's always like, I think in the beginning you need to decide, do you want to be like what you say, like a real P2P lender, you want to source the loans yourself, originate them, or do you decide to collaborate with external partners? So can you probably in the beginning walk us through the decision process that you had? So apparently you initially decide, okay, we source it ourselves. What was the reason in the first place to go that direction compared to where Mintos is now?
Yeah, I think initially when I was very much from very early days, from very beginning actually, it's always been very much like with an eyes of investor. So that's been how we approached like building the marketplace. And the initial idea was about sourcing borrowers which are actually borrowing and pledging the real estate. And then as an investor, we were thinking, okay, as an investor, I would definitely invest in such type of assets because it's secured. There's some niche where actually, because they're not really like mortgage loans, they are more like a bridge type of loans for a few years with fairly high interest rate, and basically the return you get for the risk you take is actually very good in my opinion as an investor. And that was an initial idea actually, to build a marketplace where we sort the borrowers, which are like mortgage-based loans, and then basically offer investors to invest in those loans. And then thereafter, when we started that, what we realized that sure, we have a platform, and that's very much like technology kind of driven thing. And there are many lending companies, which we call loan originators, which also would want to have the platform and would want to have access to investor base and have another funding source for the loans they originate, right? Yes, so basically, when we were looking at the market, it sort of didn't make sense what was happening. So basically what you have typical P2P platforms, right? All of them actually sourcing the borrowers, which is, of course, they have different kind of borrower segments which they want to service. But then all of them actually are competing for the same investors. If you look at for instance, at that time in the UK, like Zopa, Ratesetter, the Funding Circle, Assets Capital, all of those players, like investor base, I don't know, like obviously we cannot know for sure, but I would very confidently bet that investors are actually the same in most of those platforms. So basically all the platforms are competing for the same investors. And then also for investor, from investor perspective, it's, if you want to access like different loans, you have to register in each and every kind of platform, do all the onboarding, understand it, and so forth. Kind of doesn't make much sense. So, and we were thinking, why not build a marketplace where you actually have investors on one side, and then each lending company, they don't have to build the platforms themselves and compete for the same investors. Instead, they just connect in a marketplace and can get the same benefit of actually P2P kind of funding model when they fund the loans. And that was actually the thought process behind Mintos when we pivoted from kind of classical P2P platform to more of like marketplace for investments in loans.
Okay, because I figured it could probably be that, I don't know, did you have some challenges when you started that first path, let's say assessing loans? Did you feel like you're not really, or did you get the touch of, okay, we're doing it properly, or was it like, was very challenging, very demanding to go that road?
No, I don't. I mean, it's different businesses. I mean, obviously that's very early days. So we are talking about like 3-5 people of us. So it's it's obviously you're learning by doing and so forth. And but I mean, we have all the background and so like all the advice and so forth. I think it wasn't the challenge about. About sourcing the borrowers, of course, there's kind of limited space in sourcing and so forth. That's also we have to take into account. Like origination itself will be limited, and it is limited for all the classical kind of P2P players. It's much harder for them to enter new market and so forth. It's very operational heavy business, but it was more just seeing an opportunity and like. In the market, we're seeing that there's a need for what we do and then capitalizing on that. It was much more than that. And I mean, look, this how I see it's a very like different business what we do from kind of typical or classical, if you have these days, P2P platform. For any P2P platform, I would say the primary business is really loan origination, and that's very obviously hard business. And that requires specific kind of competence. And then this P2P platform is just another way of kind of funding, how they can fund the loans. But the main business is always actually loan origination. And then what we see with many big players actually today, that for them actually P2P platform is just one vehicle how they actually fund the loan. So if you look for the same lending club or in the US or the funding circle in the UK, like platform is just one part of the way how they fund the loans. They do like go directly to institutional, they go and make their own fund, which is publicly traded and so forth. So basically that's never kind of their primary business is running the platform. So we said we're going to focus only on this part, on creating a marketplace with lots of investors. And that makes actually a lot of sense to lending companies. Like today, as a lending company, if you want to basically build your own platform, it doesn't make much sense if you ask me. So much rather come to Mintos, connect to us, get access to from day one to 120,000 investors from day one, with all the processes in place, and just continue focusing on what you do best on loan origination. So like classical I'm actually in general I'm not a big believer in P2P, in classical P2P business because they are very separate, very different businesses. So one on sourcing the borrowers is very, very different from actually working with investors. And I'm always amazed when we see those when I see like classical P2P platform, which is basically on one side of the landing page saying, hey, come investors, you're gonna earn the highest interest rate, and then on the other side they say, hey, come borrower, you're gonna get the lowest interest rate. And then I'm always wondering, well, where do they meet? Because on one side you have to sort of entice investors to come. On the other side, of course, you have to also entice borrowers to come to the website. So I would say the classical P2P is very actually running two very separate businesses in one company.
Okay. Well, there's actually a lot to debate about. I don't know if we want to go too much into that detail now, because I personally, I'm also, I also see, like, of course, on one side makes it a bit easier probably to grow faster, but at the same time I also see like from classical P2P lending, because let's say ultimately the P2P or the lending originators that you collaborate with, you know, they have kind of the same, okay, we need to, you know, get a certain percentage of interest rate, you know, in order to make the business work. And then we also just offer it, you know, obviously there's some sort of percentage they take themselves in the loan, 5 to 10, maybe 15%. But then also there, it's like it's offered on Mintos for, let's say, 10, 12%. And at the same time, I see like classical P2P lenders, you know, they have ultimately the entire control. Of course, I definitely agree this, you know, it requires a totally different element to source loans, to, you know, the entire acquisition process, assessing the loans. But ultimately, I think they have the entire control on their platform. So they understand, you know, like what probably is one of the critical elements. People would say, okay, Mintos, how much control does Mintos have through the loans that get funded through originators, and how much access do you have on the credibility of the process of the loan originators, if that makes sense. So
I see your point, but I would argue that actually you do have quite a lot, and I would say that it's actually double control what you have in place. So when you have like a classical P2P, so it's basically one company, and why would you think that in that company it's much better run than in kind of a loan originator? And all the lending companies, they are like separate businesses. They are for-profit businesses who are actually wanting to build a great product and so forth. So for them, and especially with all the kind of tools in place, it makes like very, very little sense for them to originate low quality assets. So starting from the fact that actually they have to issue a loan before it is funded on the marketplace. So if they issue bad loans, they don't know at the moment when the issues they're going to be funding it on the marketplace. Also the skin in the game, so they have to keep that, and then many of them actually provide buyback guarantee. So there's many actually things which doesn't make sense for them to issue low quality loans, and I would argue that actually for them we come as another kind of filter, because we have a separate risk team. We do a lot of kind of real-time screening what's happening with loan portfolios, and we always can stop it. Whereas in kind of classical, you're always going to have just like one company which is running the game. But again, I would say those are very two separate businesses, and I think that in general, actually, those lending companies who are very much only focusing on loan origination, in my opinion, in many cases, going to be much better in loan origination than like P2P platform, which is focusing on both sides. They have to focus on investor acquisition, they have to focus on borrower acquisition, and basically run two businesses in parallel. Whereas if you focus on loan origination, then in many cases, like those alternative lending companies tend to be much bigger in scale and also much better in loan origination. At least that's what we see across kind of countries we operate in.
Okay. When we're now at that stage, you're setting up Mintos, and you're feeling like, or what is like looking back to the early days, what you feel like was the biggest challenge, the biggest struggle for you to really get things going with Mintos? So was it maybe financing? Was it finding really the right people for the business, setting up the platform, IT? What was like, because probably you work on so many different areas, what were like the biggest challenges you had to overcome to really get the wheel rolling for Mintos?
I think it was really about doing something new. So what we did is something which was not done before. So that meant that when we went to the loan originators or to the lending companies, we had to explain what it means actually to sell loan receivables through the marketplace to investors, and that's the way actually how you fund the loans. And they, most of them, it was the first time they actually see something like that. And when we explained, they were like, "Wow, where you were yesterday? Why you're just coming now?" So actually, it made a lot of sense to them. But it's like educating on that side, and on the other side as well. So basically, like in general, P2P was still new in the early days. But what we did is also like nice kind of iteration of it, when we actually are not sourcing the loans ourselves, the borrowers ourselves, but actually cooperating with the lending company. So we have to educate investors and then keeping them in balance. And it's always in the marketplace, it's a question of keeping in the balance. So initially we had more kind of loan supply because we were sourcing the borrowers ourselves. So then how we get the first investors. When first investors come, and there were times where there were basically zero loans available on the marketplace because we had too many investors. Then you go to the lending companies, actually talk with them, and like keeping in balance has been always something which we have to pay attention to, and we continue doing that.
You feel like looking back when you started, of course it's always easier looking in retro perspective. Is there anything you feel like back then we should have done a few things differently?
No, I think no. It's been very kind of natural progression, and it started slowly. So definitely, like the first, I still remember early days when it was basically me and maybe few developers working on the product, and then obviously we got a bit more people, but still in early days just doing basically everything myself. Just there comes investor deposit and just typing it in the system and allocating the funds and so forth and building everything. So that was very different than it is today, when you have like a whole kind of team and very specialized people working on specific things. And then it's basically gradually getting to more investors, larger loan originators, more loan originators across many different countries, and kind of gradually going. And then at some moment it really picked up the scale, and that's what we see also in numbers, where we actually are growing still now about like 8-10% month over month, and in absolute numbers it's actually quite a bit.
The one question came to my mind that was also in something I read in the early days. In order to get an understanding about the market, you've been investing also in other P2P lending companies. Is that correct?
Yeah, many. Yeah.
And what was it like that you dislike about those other companies back then when you invested? So where did you feel like this is the edge for Mintos? What was like the...
I think not necessarily dislike, but what we were looking at was user experience, and in general more from the eye of investor. And as I said, many actually like classical P2P platforms, they have to focus on both sides, on borrower kind of journey and also an investor journey. So we were looking at from investor perspective and just trying to see the things which we believe are the best in terms of user experience and kind of transparency, and how we would want to see as investors the platform to be built. So we took a lot from many different players which we saw, okay, this is something which we think works very well, and applied at Mintos. And we invested across, I would say, 7 to 10 platforms across the globe.
Still invested?
Just like test accounts, nothing like magnificent.
How is it about Mintos itself? Are you invested to some extent in Mintos?
A little bit. I still was just recently ended paying back my MBA loans. So
okay. So now you can you have a bit more money to pump into Mintos.
But again, as with any, what we also always educate investors is diversification within the Mintos. So you have to diversify. The best is really diversify. There's nothing better what we can sort of educate about. So yes, sure, there are going to be loan originators or loans which yield high interest rate, but that usually comes with a higher risk. Some going to be lower interest rate. Obviously, it seems kind of enticing to go after like higher yield, but in general, actually, the best is just to diversify across many different loan originators, many different countries, borrowers, and also loan types. And that's something definitely which we cannot overemphasize as much. And the same is also about diversification across different asset classes. So we never would say that put all your investable assets in P2P or put all your investable assets in Mintos. So you should also diversify across asset class. Having said that, obviously, I strongly believe that the return what you get for the risk you take at investing in loans through Mintos is very good. A good ratio of return for the risk investors take.
Well, there's in the market, there's also many other P2P lenders that have approached the business model in the way that Mintos does. What would you say is that Mintos probably aside from the bigger variety that Mintos offers, what would you say is something that you would, not bad-mouthing competition obviously, but what is it that you feel like is your edge in that business model that you do better? You know, we all know companies, we don't need to name them, that have the similar business model. What do you feel like is the edge for Mintos?
I think it's some of the kind of things which we work on, and definitely transparency, which has been since day one. So all the kind of annual reports we publish, like obviously it's easy for investors to say, yes, loan originators should publish as much information as they can and have, but we have to be also take into account that they are not public companies, they're private companies. Not all of them gonna have like that, those standards which kind of have public companies. So we have to deal with what we have from the loan originators. Also, being in the front runner in product development, like product is, we have a fairly big product team and engineering team which is focusing always on bringing the best tools for investors, and some of them which are the same investment strategies or secondary market auto invest or very customizable auto invest, or in general user experience, and many other new things which we are now working on is definitely something which most likely I would emphasize as a kind of a strength of Mintos, where we put a lot of kind of work and effort to actually make this investment experience transparent, easy, and kind of understandable.
Okay. There's one topic, especially in the context of growth and expansion, that I think a lot about lately, which is you know, a lot what can fuel growth for P2P lenders is collaborating with institutional investors. And we see it, let's say in Germany, Aux Money, you know, they are highly funded through the Dutch insurance company Aegon. They claimed like 1.5 billion in 3 years. How do you look at this topic, and is Mintos currently or planning to also collaborate with institutional investors?
We very much focus on retail investors. So when we talk about like classical P2P platforms, I still view them as a loan originator. So basically their primary business is originating the loans. Sure, they're gonna try to fund some of the loans through like retail investors, but obviously it makes sense for them to go also to institutional investors. And that's what we see with our loan originators who are using the marketplace, so Mintos marketplace. So part of the loans they actually fund through the marketplace, and part they actually go directly to institutional investors, and institutional investors get access to those loans without going through Mintos.
Okay.
And today we definitely focus on retail investors, and gonna continue also in the near future, definitely.
Okay. One of the topics I checked it on various sites, but I never found an answer. You probably know there's a very, I would say, controversial blog post online in regards to Mintos that is, you know, pointing out, you know, there's big risks involved with Mintos from several areas. I just like to pick one of the concerns out. This was concerned in regards to Aigas Kresenfels. When you look him up on LinkedIn, you see he's a co-founder of Mintos. He's a co-founder of Mogo Finance as well. It's like the biggest loan originator working with Mintos. Can you explain what is the relationship with Aigas? Is he a founder of Mintos, and you know, like which kind of position does he have within Mintos?
Sure. So basically, Aigas and he's one of the equity investors. So when I was thinking about the funding of Mintos, he has been investing across different kind of finance companies, and knew him fairly well and just approached him, and obviously there's some overlap, especially since he has invested in several kind of lending companies, and some of them are on the marketplace, so there's some shareholding overlap, but that's about it. So all the loan originators we treat the same, like all of them are on market conditions, and I think what is very important to realize that like shareholding structure of Mintos is very different from any of the shareholding structure on any of the lending companies, even if there's some overlap. So you can think of it the same as say venture capital fund would have invested in I don't know TransferWise, which is working together with, I don't know, some whatever lending company. Obviously, there's some shareholder overlap, but that kind of doesn't mean that you cannot do business together. And there are some loan originators, but I'm always fascinated to read those stories because today we have 60 different lending companies from 29 different countries, and as much as I would want to see our equity investor to be in all of them and having majority in all of them, well, obviously it's just in a few of them, so that's not something which we are particularly kind of shy about or something. So that's all also transparently seen on the marketplace, and all those lending companies which have overlap, they do have a shareholder kind of note that there are some shareholder overlap. But that doesn't affect the business at all. So it's still the same conditions. And if anything, the kind of discussions with those lending companies are even more fierce than with kind of other lending companies.
I saw also in that area around here, there's also like it's an industry area, a lot of companies around here. Mogo Finance also in the same building as Mintos. I read also about Hypo-Kredite. Do you understand from the outset that people see maybe a conflicting potential when there's a shareholder overlap, and Mintos obviously by more than 1/3 is financed also through loans from Mogo Finance, and there's like a shareholder connection, and you're obviously tied very closely together. Do you see there's a conflicting potential that investors see from the outside?
Well, you could definitely, sure, but then again, we look the same Mogo. It's not actually 1/3. It's more like 1/6 of the portfolio is Mogo. But then again, it's still. Mogo is like a few hundred people organization with all of its own kind of focus and things they do, and then Mintos is just kind of another source of funding for them. They do have bond issues. They have. That are kind of institutional investors and so forth. So it's as any other loan originator to us, and the fact that we have kind of overlapping kind of or basically investors or basically shareholders who are invested in those companies, such actually that's even could be to the benefit of us, because then we can ask them what are some other companies in the space, or what do you think about this, that, and or this country. So if anything, obviously it might from a very kind of high level look sure, but then again it's we treat all the loan originators the same, and there's no kind of issue.
Okay. Then next topic is something that I also covered on my blog and on the YouTube channel, was the discussion about the notice by the FCA. Without rolling out that topic now again, I think that there was everything was been said mostly. Mintos applied for or applied to do some regulated financial services in the UK. How surprising was the rejection in the end to you?
It was a very long process. So we applied actually more than 2 years ago. And in the UK, so also just to give some background, it's not like Mintos holding company applying and so forth. It's basically we created a subsidiary which would work in the UK, work with UK loan originators and UK borrowers, and then just basically use our kind of technology behind that. So that's kind of a separate business from kind of the whole Mintos business. Yeah. And then the UK is a very kind of peculiar market. So in those few years since we were in the application process, there were many actually platforms which applied. It took a while for the FCA to actually start looking at our case. Meanwhile, actually the FCA approach to P2P lending has been changing. So as of recently, we read that they actually kind of want to slow it down and so forth. So there was something going there. Obviously the Brexit was happening, so many things happening throughout the time, and also we are at a very different stage today than we were 2.5 years ago, when we were even not half of the people today, maybe a third of the people here. And obviously we did our best to basically secure the necessary permissions. The FCA deemed that we don't have enough kind of resources in place. we did our best to prove that that's not true. Well, they said that they still think that it is how they think, and now we are just working, taking their kind of feedback into account, and gonna basically set up the operations anyway.
What was the reason then after you got that notice? Because I read also in that document you had like I don't know what it was, 28 days timeline to object against the decision, and what was the reason you didn't follow up there and said we leave it be now?
I mean, I think it's never kind of good use of your time to actually argue with the regulator. So we much rather take the feedback into account and just work on addressing the issues they kind of raised and just reapply, and that's much kind of better use of our time than just going and kind of arguing. And then again, you have to take into account that we applied and they were looking at the application which was more than 2.5 years back in time. So that's very different than what we would actually submit today, but because of the lengthy process it took quite a while for them to look at it, and they looked at the application as it was as it were like a few years ago.
But I think you updated it at some points.
Sure. So we changed kind of also based on the feedback which we got along the way. We changed
Okay. Well, there was a lot of things said also when this topic was already covered. Maybe last question in that regard, just maybe for absolute beginners, because I think I don't know if it's an underrated risk element talking about regulations. Can you maybe just in very simple terms, just for absolute beginners, try to explain the regulatory differences that you face in Latvia and what you see currently in the UK? Because I understood from a few interviews that you fancy very much the approach that is happening in the UK. Is it possible to narrow it down just in simple terms what the differences are?
Yeah, so
operating a business then like
Mintos? I mean, first of all, we have to also actually realize that there's no kind of Mintos operates across 29 different countries. So obviously, with respect to Latvian lending companies, loan originators and investors, like Latvian legislation would apply. But that's like, if you ask me, like nobody cares about what we do here if we do it in Mexico. It's like in Mexico, it's completely different kind of setup. So we have to talk about difference between the UK and any other market where we operate. And the UK, the difference is that there's clearly set P2P kind of licensing, which is not the case in any other country actually, at least to the extent where how it is in the UK. And the main difference is really that by having a separate kind of regime for that, they put like specific things in place, such as like disclosure of information, what should be the management and so forth, what type of contracts should be concluded in what way, and that's basically the main difference in the UK from the rest of the other countries. And there's still even on the EU level, there's no like harmonized approach to P2P lending, and only last year, like European Commission came out and they said that maybe in 2020 they're going to introduce more kind of harmonized. Up until then, it's going to be each separate country has its own kind of approach, and there are bits and pieces how they approach. Some of them have specific regimes, such as the UK. Some of them don't have anything in place.
Okay. Last topic probably, because I think we talked a lot about already. People have enough pieces here that they can take hopefully something away. Obviously last part, let's talk about Berlin. Let's talk about Germany. It was one of the questions that I received the most prior to this interview. Maybe you can explain why Berlin? Why do you move to Berlin now with your office? How do you look at Berlin being one of the pieces for the expansion? What do you plan exactly coming to Berlin?
We're opening the office. We're not, obviously we're gonna remain also here. We're opening another office in the Berlin, and the short story is basically just to be closer to investors. So we do have a lot of investors coming from Germany. About 50,000 of investors actually do come from Germany, and just being closer to them, and that's the main reason. Another would be that also getting additional access to talent, getting access to talent, which is basically obviously Berlin is a much bigger city, much more vibrant startup scene. So now when we are actually, today we are about 70 people here. So with all the hiring plans which we have in place, we will most likely double the headcount this year. And that puts kind of constraint, there's some constraints in kind of here in this market, how much talent we can sort of so basically with respect to Berlin, it's being closer to our investors and having people who actually know the market and just basically have access to the talent.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think you said something like a copywriter from PayPal or something.
Yeah, as well. So those are the guys which we. So one of our recent guys is joining from PayPal. So those are the guys, obviously, which is very hard to come by, if at all, here in Riga. So we don't have those kind of big corp companies.
Okay, but it has nothing to do in terms of you wanna, But what's like the definition? You want to be closer to the investors. So do you feel like you're not close enough operating from Latvia, obviously, or?
Yeah, well, it's always, I think, better if you're based in the same country, speaks the same language, like be native in that and so forth. So today as well, if you look at the very kind of simple things such as like investor service, for us to find people who are actually native speakers in German, who have experience and willingness to work in investor service, we're not gonna find them that many here in Riga. So obviously in Germany that would be much easier. The same goes about when we talk about kind of community leads, or the same like copywriters or something. There's actually this is also something which you have to take into account, that it's not that kind of easy to come by those native speaking people here with a specific kind of competence we need at this stage. So Berlin makes a lot of sense.
And you feel like, but do you see any loan originators in Germany that will be,
if German investors want to invest at like 3%, we're happy to. So there's
not the
plenty
market.
of them. So basically, what we see, there's a very like highly banked market, and there's very few alternative lending companies. And if there are, they are basically most likely providing like much lower yields, obviously much lower risk as well, but. Well, we would be happy to bring them, but today we basically see that investors most likely have higher yield expectations than what are the kind of loan supply available in Germany.
Okay. Mintos on the way. Is Mintos on the way to also look for a banking license? Is that something that plays a part in your thoughts? No. Nothing. And last question, probably in November last year, you announced in connection with the new funding round that you received, that you want to set up also personalized IBAN accounts. Maybe two questions here. First, what is the reason behind, or which benefit do you see like from that, from integrating that product, let's say, or that service within Mintos, and what was the current status here?
Sure. So basically, with the IBAN account, that would be your regular bank account. So that would mean that you could transfer, because now today you can transfer from your kind of bank account to Mintos, and then you can withdraw it back to the same bank account. When we gonna provide IBAN numbers, will mean that you actually can use Mintos account as any other bank account. Then you can transfer to any other kind of your friend, or pay for your rent or whatever, receive your salary on the bank account and so forth. So that just gives you much more flexibility with the money which is available on your account at Mintos. So with the status, so we expect to launch it this year. So let's see how it goes. It should be sooner than later. So I intentionally say like this year, not to sort of always promise, but in general it should be sooner than later.
Okay. I have all the questions are answered. Do you feel like anything was left out? Anything that you've in the end maybe want to share directly with the investors that are looking from Germany?
I think you had the good questions, very detailed questions. So in general, we are super open, and also as we discussed a bit before the conversation. So we're happy to actually to see investors coming here, and we've seen actually a fair amount of investors visiting to our office. So always, if you are somewhere nearby, stop by. And also when we gonna have office in Berlin, super happy to see investors, and in general, so if there are any questions, we're happy to answer them, be it face to face or through our investor service team. So nothing in particular which I would share, apart from the fact that I think there's going to be many exciting products or many exciting things which we're going to bring to the investors actually this year. So some of them which are most likely in a few months' time, we're going to announce a new kind of a product, and then also working on the mobile app that's going to be finally we're going to provide that, and then providing bank account number so that they actually can have more kind of easier access and use of the money on the Mintos account, and then also Mintos card is also on the way. So they're going to be what we believe great developments, and hopefully going to receive also feedback from investors. Well, at the end of the day, we are creating the platform for investors, so we take the feedback into account and do our best to build the best product which serves their financial needs.
All right. We're looking forward to that. Thank you very much for the conversation.
Thank you for coming by.
Martins. Thank you.